Now, always a few people coming in late, isn't it? You've missed it. We've declared independence. You can all go home. So we'll just wait for everybody. I'll ask people to have their seat. Right. I want you to listen carefully and try and count up how many mistakes I make in the next 10 to 15 minutes, because I'm sure there's going to be a few, since I've only skimmed read what I thought was going to be a very simple introduction. Slightly more complicated, it turns out.
Sorry.
No, detail's good. Unless you're Theresa May. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are in Dunfermline on a beautiful sunny day. And for our viewers outside of the UK, which I understand there are many right now watching and joining us, so it's not just all of us here in the room. It's everybody that's tuned in to YouTube and also via Zoom. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you for coming. I've scored out a few things because this is far too posh for the way I speak. And I thought, I would never say that. But I want to welcome you to Dunfermline and to what is a very special occasion. Just so that you know, SSRG is a think tank that's been around for 5 years. We've done this once before in 2022, which was very busy and very successful. And our main aim is to bring like-minded people who believe in Scotland's independence and part of our future to come together to discuss this special and important subject. And none of that was on the script. So it's my honour to welcome you, and welcome you all, including at home and around the world, and especially our distinguished guests, who I understand are watching from the United States. And no, it's not Donald Trump. He's at McDonald's. So this session is called Decolonisation and Self-Determination. And obviously we're very pleased at the SSRG to be working with Salvo and Liberate Scotland, and to introduce what is a very important subject. So we're going to discuss today with our special guests how we advance Scotland's future and its place in the international legal order. Some of it might sound a bit boring. Legal arguments sometimes are. However, they also have a tendency to clarify the law and to lead to important decisions. For instance, 3 women from Edinburgh called Forward for Scotland went to the Supreme Court recently against the Scottish Government's best legal minds, which that certainly is a surprise. But they certainly spent a lot of money. So we're here in doing so as petitioners to invoke the authority of the General Assembly resolutions 1514, 1541 and 1654. And no, that's not my phone number. Binding obligations under Article 73E of the United Nations Charter. The legal submission that has recently been produced convincingly asserts that Scotland has never exercised full self-government and that its people have been denied their inalienable right to self-determination under international law, particularly those through the systemic erosion of Scotland's constitutional autonomy by Westminster. And we see many examples of this, with Westminster overruling what Scotland has voted for. For instance, most of us voted Remain in 2016. That was ignored. We have with us an extinguished...
Not extinguished. I hope it's not extinguished.
It could indeed turn out to be like that. Yeah. Do you want me to start from the beginning? No, better not. So I'm going to introduce, first of all, our distinguished... help me here.
Distinguished.
Distinguished. I was nearly right. Our distinguished panel. Sara Salyers of Liberation. Professor Alf Baird. One of our international guests, Mr. Is it Azizov? Azizov.
Yeah.
I was close. And we also have two other distinguished guests. Some of them you may already know. We've got Professor Robert Black, KC. And the well-known Scottish independent supporter, of course, Craig Murray. Now, thank you very much. That's my homework. But before we move on, and we move on to our first member, distinguished, yes, very distinguished. I want to say a few words about some of our panellists. So Professor Alf Baird, if you don't know, is the co-convener of Liberation Scotland, declared this submission as a momentous development. And this is a submission that has been sent to the United Nations. Sara Salyers, Director of Salvo, underscored the historical misrepresentation of Scotland as a voluntary partner in the United Kingdom, noting instead a reality of colonial exploitation, cultural suppression, and the displacement of indigenous population. These facts, she emphasised, have been concealed beneath persistent orthodoxy, otherwise known as the BBC. This panel convenes not only to elaborate upon the substance of that submission, but to engage in a deeper moral and legal reckoning it demands. So I now wish to introduce you to our first panellist, and she is indeed very distinguished, Sara Salyers.
Thank you. I think we've just about got time for me to take a minute just to say thank you both to SSRG for giving us this platform, to my colleagues who will be setting out in person for the first time what Salvo Liberation is about, how we plan to go about it, why we believe we have every chance of success, and what the implications are for Scotland's future. This is an extraordinary moment for me to be here on this platform with, I won't say who they are because I don't want their heads to get too big, but at least three of my heroes, and Sharov is rapidly becoming another hero. So it's really quite a moment. Al said earlier, trying to describe what's happening today. This is launching the boat. Of course, he would say that with his maritime background and see it as launching the boat, but it really is. And you're all here with us. This is one of those moments that people will say, I know that people will say in future, I was there. You're here today. And here also today are quite a number of those whose work has made this moment and what happens from here possible. These are people that have worked alongside. Oh, have I lost my? These are people I've worked alongside for about 3 years now. It's an extraordinary thing too that we should be here in 3 years, just 3 years. They've worked as if getting Scotland free, liberated, was the day job and their vocation. They've worked tirelessly. They've never had a penny for it. There's been days when there's been tears and there's been exhaustion and there's been crisis after crisis, and they're still here. And history may remember the names of those of us standing here up here today, but it's very unlikely to remember their names, and that's very unfair because we wouldn't be here without them. And so you know who you are. You know who you are. So, can I just give them a round of applause, please? At least one of them is staring steadfastly down like that in case anybody calls her up. Right. So the other thing is I very rarely read a speech. And I'm reading it to this today for a very simple reason. Because so many of you who know me well also know that even if I have notes, once I start speaking, I'll think of something I should have added. And half an hour into a 15-minute speech, I have to try and come back to where I should be. So for once, and on this particular day, I'm going to read what I hope is the context for what comes next. And I will just lastly say that among the many important things that are happening right now, right here, is that a famously brave and principled KC with an extraordinary reputation for honesty and humanity and courage is here to be the first to break ranks with an establishment, a legal establishment that has parroted the colonial line about Scotland's constitutional relationship within the United Kingdom, the first ever. It's huge. My hope is that it's the beginning of the dam breaking. The principle that the first person someone who cannot be dismissed as a moon howler, a fringe nutter, not by any stretch of the imagination, for me, fulfills the position of the boy in the story who pointed and said, "The emperor is not wearing any clothes." On which note, the title of my paper submission is Either Or. There are two possible routes for the Scottish people to end the union with England. There are only two routes, and they're mutually exclusive. The first is a negotiated withdrawal from the state Scotland is supposed to have co-created via an international treaty with England, the state known today as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The second is liberation, decolonisation, which restores to a colonised people the right to their exercise of self-determination. For Scots, that means the right to determine their own future, to hold a referendum or a dozen referendums without interference or involvement from Westminster. The question is not which is the better route to Scottish independence. The question is which route is possible. And the answer to that depends on whether or not a new state was created in 1707 and whether or not Scotland became a part of that new state. Of course, according to the legal and political orthodoxy, that's exactly what happened. Maybe Scotland was made into an abused, plundered, exploited and despised junior partner. Maybe, as a partner, it has the right to end this abusive and one-sided relationship. But if it truly entered a union which produced a new state, the one defined by the Treaty of Union as a single kingdom, meaning a single crown and crown territory, with a single, with a single new parliament, then Scotland's constitutional position must be defined as a partner within that state. This constitutional arrangement is what's meant by the voluntary partnership. With me so far? Sorry. If correct, because of the rights of sovereign states, Scotland could only achieve international recognition as an independent state through a negotiated withdrawal from the state it co-founded, the United Kingdom. Why? Think of the union as a marriage, and the state created, then called Great Britain, as the child of that marriage. The rights of the child are protected. They sit above the individual rights and wishes of the parents. Divorce terms, custody, maintenance, and a division of assets must all be agreed. But the important thing for Scottish independence is that a voluntary partnership can, by definition, be ended by mutual consent. Negotiated withdrawal, of course, is the route discussed and debated endlessly by the Scottish political establishment and by independence advocates and pundits until now. How to achieve a democratic event that Westminster could not ignore. How to hold Westminster's feet to the fire using the devolved system it created. How about remedial secession? How do we force Westminster to honour the right of a treaty partner to withdraw from that treaty? So now we come to the contradictions that point to Scotland's real position. At the same time it argues Scotland was and remains a voluntary partner in the Union, the Anglo-British state also argues that Scotland ceased to exist as a legal personality in 1707, and that it has no remnants of its former legal personality. So who would negotiate for Scotland in the event of independence, and how? And if no one remains to negotiate, what has happened to Scotland's legal identity? We know from overwhelming evidence that England continued after 1707, a truth reaffirmed by the opinion of Crawford and Boyle in 2012, of which you will hear more shortly. So Scotland ceased as a state, England continued, and yet Scotland is to be regarded as a partner in this state. If this sounds contradictory, it is because it is. We are meant to believe, and God help us too many of us have believed, that if the Great Britain Scotland co-created happens to look and behave exactly like England in the character of its historic crown, parliament, and constitutional provisions and practices, that's an irrelevance. This doesn't affect the legal technicalities that block Scotland and its people as the partner in this state that looks exactly like just England from making any move towards independence. But of course, it does affect those technicalities. They're all important. Suppose the treaty and acts of union were never given effect, are in fact what is known as inoperative. Then there's no partnership agreement, no basis for a partnership, no actual union, and a negotiated withdrawal from a union that doesn't exist is impossible. An inoperative treaty means no legal framework for negotiations to exit that treaty. It's a dead end. According to the UK government, the proof that Scotland is not a dependency or colony is that it partnered with England in the creation of a state known as the UK. This is an assertion that first appeared in 1954 under the Royal Commission, which was commissioned just as decolonisation was getting underway at the United Nations, and that is not a coincidence. And that report said, Scotland is a nation and entered the union with England as a voluntary partner and not a dependency. Now, the sole evidence of any partnership is the partnership agreement. In this case, the treaty and acts of union which enabled the creation of a single kingdom and parliament of the state of Great Britain. What comes next may sound insane to everyone who thinks they know what kind of state they live in, how it was founded by treaty and joined the two former kingdoms of England and Scotland, but here it is. Simple fact, we have been living in a fairy tale, a fictional state. There are fundamental and essential conditions to every treaty. The same is true of the Treaty and Acts of Union. The most important condition was the preservation of Scotland's constitution under the claim of right, which condition, as we all know, has been swept aside. But there are even more fundamental and essential effects that underpin the creation of a new state, and which are defined by Articles 1 and 3 in the Treaty and Acts. These prescribe a new, united kingdom, and to be pedantic, that does mean one kingdom only, and that requires one single united crown. because, as you've heard me say many times, a kingdom is the territorial jurisdiction of a crown. What really happened? These fundamental, the most fundamental and essential effects of the treaty and acts were discarded, as were its fundamental and essential conditions and every one of its subordinate provisions. But that's hardly surprising when it was thrown in the bin as soon as it was signed. Instead, Scotland was added to the English coronation oath. That means it was added to the English crown. Our own crown remains to this day as incompatible as ever with the English because the Scottish crown is the community of the realm, us. And not, as in England, the monarch. But it has been made subordinate to that of England. So there are two crowns still, two kingdoms. Scotland is administered by England. And this is why no English monarch has taken the Scottish oath of accession and the oath to maintain the claim of right in its entirety as required by Scots law since 1703, in fact since 1689 and before. And this means that a single United Kingdom exists only in the imaginations of those who see a single and extended England as the realisation of its historically preferred form of partnership. The Scottish Parliament was abolished by royal decree, not put into abeyance. There's some news for people who thought the Scottish Parliament just went into abeyance. It was not. It was abolished. But not the English. The English Parliament continued exactly as before, but with a new name. It didn't ratify the acts of the two former parliaments. Why does that matter? Well, you've now got a new kingdom, you see. So you had an act ratifying the Treaty of Union that applied in Scotland, and an act ratifying the Treaty of Union that applied in England, but you had no act for the new kingdom that ratified those two acts, ratified the treaty on behalf of the new Parliament, which you'd need to, really. And why? Because there was no single kingdom for that to apply to. No new elections were held. The Scottish MPs were just co-opted into England's Parliament in the same way the Irish MPs would be added almost a century later. This is not what the Partnership Agreement, the Treaty and Acts of Union authorised. This is a different animal entirely. This is annexation, a kind of legal invasion under the pretext of a treaty. But does that make Scotland a colony? It absolutely does. It means that a colony, dependency, or non-self-governing territory is the only constitutional definition that can define Scotland's relationship with England, just as it has defined so many, many others. Sorry. So either we're a partner in the union that created a new state in 1707, as described by the Partnership Agreement, Treaty of Union, or a colony. One or the other, there's no in between. You cannot be a partner without the legal contract we call a partnership agreement, and between independent nations that's called a treaty. And you can't be a partner without a single characteristic of that status. You can't be colonised just a bit any more than you can be pregnant, just a bit. A nation has the rights and obligations of a partner, including the full exercise of its right to self-determination, or it does not. Scotland never got the union described in the treaty. Instead, it was swallowed by the state of England. And this has huge implications. Because it remains unrealised, the Treaty of Union is inoperative. And with an inoperative treaty, there's no authorising instrument for the Union, defining Scotland's rights, obligations and status. There's no binding mutual contract to dissolve. There's no right of secession from a treaty whose terms can't be broken or violated because it's never come into effect. No legal framework within which secession could be negotiated. No continuing principle of mutual consent, because substituting annexation for the terms of the treaty disposed of mutual consent 3 centuries ago. Any remaining legal effect for a treaty that has never taken effect in the first place, nor any legal mechanism, and this is the big one, nor any legal mechanism for a colony dependency to force the administering power to permit Scots their right to self-determination. I'll just say that again. There is no legal or political mechanism by which Scotland, as a dependency of the continuing state of England calling itself the United Kingdom, can force the administering power to grant us our right of self-determination. We don't have that. So this is as practical and fundamental an impediment to Scottish secession or withdrawal, and therefore any right to self-determination, as it gets. No matter what kind of democratic event we might organise, so long as we buy into the constitutional fairy tale of the partnership state, we'll always wind up in the position of trying to negotiate with a mist, a fog of language behind which there's nothing solid. Meanwhile, Scottish politicians, jurists and independence pundits go in circles of outrage that a partner should be treated as just a territory, that's a colony by the way, and English-only law blocks Scottish democratic expression. All the while, with its never implemented treaty in hand, the Anglo-British state continues to treat Scotland as exactly what it is, a territory under its control. And still, despite the evidence of its own eyes, our political establishment buys into the voluntary partner story. A story invented to conceal our colonisation and to block the possibility of Scotland accessing the right of self-determination of colonised peoples under international law. Why? George Orwell wrote in an unpublished preface to Animal Farm, "At any given moment there is an orthodoxy, a body of ideas which it is assumed all right-thinking people will accept without question. It's not exactly forbidden to say this or that, but it's not done to say it. Anyone who challenges this prevailing orthodoxy finds himself silenced with surprising effectiveness. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing, either in the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals." So what we've been up against is simply orthodoxy. But the orthodoxy that has until now gone unchallenged, and I'm nearly done. The voluntary partner narrative must be torn down, because Scotland, the dependency of England calling itself the UK, Scotland, the non-self-governing territory, has a route to achieving its right to self-determination. And the right to self-determination is how we achieve independence. That is the one Liberation Scotland is now taking with our partners, JPTI. Liberation, decolonisation, the restoration of sovereignty to a colonised people, grounded in international law and universal human rights. This is the just, rational and lawful remedy for the 300-year-old criminal injustice of our annexation by the English state. More than 60 British colonies have achieved independence, including America, Africa, and Ireland, and countries in the Caribbean, in the Middle East, oceanic nations. Every one unique, yet every one sharing a common core of devastating colonial impacts. Liberation was their route to freedom and recovery. When we speak about independence, it's a half remedy, because liberation means not just independence, but recovery from colonization and all that it has done to a people's identity and psyche and well-being and sense of itself. And make no mistake, this is urgent. We're not merely a technical colony. Scotland is being stripped bare, impoverished for the benefit of the elites of the south and their collaborators, while our people remain among those Fanon called the wretched of the earth. We're in a race to save those people, our future, our nation, and everything that makes Scotland Scottish, not British, before Scotland and all that it could offer its own people and the world is erased for good. The place that begins is within the international community, whose recognition of our true status as a nation, interrupted by annexation, made a dependency and never a partner to England, confers on us the right to remove the stranglehold of the colonising administering power, the right to self-determination without permission from or interference by Westminster, and whose recognition of a liberated Scotland is what will define our independence. This is the only path open to us, the path on which, through and with our representatives, our spokespeople, our teams, and particularly Justice Portu International, who will be speaking for us, representing us at the United Nations, both in Geneva and New York. We have now set out on this journey, on this path, on Scotland's behalf. Thank you.